In Jesus' day, popular thought divided society into two groups, sinners and saints. The two groups mentioned in verse 2, the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, would have been very sure of where they stood. They were saints. The teachers of the law were professional experts in Old Testament law. They not only knew which group they belonged to, they defined it. The Pharisees, meanwhile, were a group of religious enthusiasts. They had day jobs, but they scrupulously ensured they kept the Old Testament law. They didn't think they were perfect, but ultimately looked to their obedience as a means of receiving God's blessing. The sinners, well, that was more or less everybody else. Sinners weren't necessarily immoral people, although immoral people would have been classified as sinners, but others were too, including those whose trade made them richly unclean. As we'll see, that included shepherds. It also included tax collectors, whose collaboration with the Roman authorities made them public hate figures. Here's the question in the religious leaders' minds. Into which category do they place Jesus? On the one hand, there's no doubt that Jesus is doing good. His healings astounded everybody. His teaching was life-changing. His kindness was universal. But his choice of company seemed to count against it all. Why was Jesus so keen to be around the dregs of society? Why was he so keen to eat with them? Like today, enjoying a meal conveyed an intimacy retained for friends, those you welcomed and accepted. So as Jesus ate with tax collectors and sinners, it seemed like he was ripping up the rule book like an anarchist. To the religious leaders, this was destabilizing, even threatening. They were disgusted by Jesus, as shown in their mutterings of verse 2. Jesus is aware of their criticism, yet he is undaunted. He will not apologise for the company he keeps. In fact, here he justifies it, telling 3 parables, including the one we'll be looking at today. Jesus opens in verse 4. Suppose one of you has 100 sheep and loses one of them. Notice, one of you has 100 sheep. Jesus is casting the Pharisees and the teachers of the law as shepherds. The Pharisees and teachers of the law actually had a complicated relationship with shepherding. On the one hand, a shepherd's care for his flock often stopped him from fulfilling religious duties or attending festivals. That was part of what put them in the sinner category. Shepherding wasn't seen as a profession to aspire to. On the other hand, they willingly embraced the title shepherd for themselves. They saw their nation as a flock and themselves as its guardians, those who were responsible for teaching God's word and maintaining God's standards. With that in mind, listen to Jesus' words again. Suppose one of you has 100 sheep and loses one of them. This isn't just a story about a generic shepherd. This is a story about each of them. They are shepherds who are personally culpable for losing precious sheep. Jesus is prompting the Pharisees and the teachers of the law to reflect on how they're relating to those that they call sinners. He's alluding to the Old Testament, particularly Ezekiel 34, where God criticises shepherds for failing to lead the people rightly. Supremely, they failed because they neglected to show God's own heart for his wayward people. The most famous psalm of the Old Testament, Psalm 23, describes the Lord himself as a shepherd whose commitment to his people causes him to walk with them through dark valleys, pursuing them with goodness and love. He certainly doesn't merely label them as sinners and then refuse to lift a finger to help. In fact, the shepherd in Jesus' parable bears much in common with the shepherd of Psalm 23. For just one lost sheep, this shepherd scours the entire landscape until he finds it, then heaves it onto his own shoulder and joyfully brings it home. Then he gets his friends together for a party. Such is his happiness at having found his lost sheep. It's not that the shepherd doesn't care about the 99 that he's left behind in the open country. It's that he cares for each and every one of his sheep. In fact, the shepherd's willingness to go and find the lost sheep should give confidence to the 99 left behind. If ever anything were to happen to them, he would do the same for them too. So Jesus is rounding on his critics. He's saying to them, you have lost sheep because you failed to point them to the limitless love and mercy of God for them in their sin. But now I am going after those sheep to bring them home. For the sake of your religious comfort, you may abandon them, but now I have come to bring them home. And that, as Jesus indicates in verse 7, causes heaven to rejoice. So like the divine shepherd of Psalm 23, pursuing his flock with goodness and mercy, and like the shepherd in Jesus' parable who lifts the lost sheep onto his own shoulders, Jesus will do whatever is necessary to make his lost ones safe. Ultimately, that would require walking through the darkest valley for them, choosing to bear God's wrath for their sin at the cross. And now, he extends the welcome that he will win for them, associating with them, eating with them, welcoming them. As Jesus tells this parable, he is turning the tables on the shepherds of Israel. He's highlighting what a shepherd should be like, accepting responsibility, diligently searching for those who are lost, bearing the cost of bringing them home and rejoicing with the community when they're found. Far from criticizing Jesus, the Pharisees should have been enthusiastically joining in with the very task that God had assigned them to do. Today, Jesus is the same. He still counts his sheep in ones. He still loves it when lost ones come home. And he delights when his people share his compassion for the lost, not merely labelling them as sinners, but pointing them to their love and mercy that he so freely gives.